Greetings in the name of the Most High Yahuwah and his son Yahusha to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. I am Brother Hiram, and I am bringing forth a lesson, a teaching in this video, which I have entitled Unclean Sex Acts, the Secrets of the Watchers. Now, this is the final version of this teaching. As some of you know, about a month ago, I put out a beta version of this teaching. I only shared it with about 10 people. It was mostly mores and teachers. And it was unlisted. It wasn't public. And it ended up getting over 50 views. And so I didn't intend for it to be shared as widely as it was, but nonetheless, my purpose was to get feedback because I listen. I listen to people. I value other people's insights and other people's even opinions, when it comes to mores and teachers. And I did end up getting feedback, some positive, some negative, some neutral. And as a result, there's some things I had eliminated that weren't necessary. There's some things I've added in that were necessary. And now this teaching is ready to go public. And so I give the Father praise for that. And I give the Father praise for those of you that gave me the initial feedback in order to move this project forward. Now, what I suggest is that you go through this teaching all the way through and then go through it again, and especially zero in on those parts that really piqued your interest. It may take you a few times to really get this because some of the things I'm going to introduce in this teaching are going to be new to some of you. This is going to be the first time that you have heard some of these things brought out in the way that I'm going to bring them out. Now, this is a very important subject. And you may ask, why are you dealing with this? Why are you dealing with the subject like this? And I'm dealing with this for this reason. I mean, this is part of my calling. This is part of who I am. I am a restoration minister. All right. I have been in the restoration ministry for about 30 years now. When I say restoration ministry, what I mean is this. In Acts 3:19, it says that the Shamayim, the heavens, must receive Yahusha until the times of the restitution of all things. That word restitution means restoration. So before Yahusha comes back, there's going to be a restoration where that us being in a state of apostasy as we are in the body of Messiah and in Israel, that a lot of truths are going to be restored. In fact, all things are going to be restored. And the Most High is going to send back his son, Yahusha, to receive a spotless bride, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, set apart and without blemish. And so we have to be humble enough to accept that there's a lot of things that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing. And there's some things we're not doing that we should be doing. This is what restoration is all about. I am a repairer of the breach, a restorer of paths to dwell in. This is what I'm called to do. I spent 15 years sitting under and serving in the ministries of other restoration ministers. So I know the restoration ministry very well. And I know that it can be hard work. And you'll see why as we get into this teaching. You deal with things that the people in the body of Messiah are doing that they don't want to let go of. They want to continue doing. They want to make excuses for. They want to justify themselves. And and it's not a matter of being judgmental because I'm talking about myself as well. There are things over the years that I have hung on to and made excuses for and justified myself with, only to find out that I was wrong and I needed to change. And so I'm not an outsider looking in and just pointing the finger at you, but I am a forerunner with this thing that I have had to be restored in many areas, and I'm continuing to be restored because I'm pressing toward the mark. I'm striving to enter in at the straight gate, like many of you all are. So keep that in mind as you're going through this teaching. But as I said, just don't just go through it and make your judgment. You may need to go through it a few times and take some notes on the particular parts of it that get your attention. And if you have any comments, then I'm always open for that. You can comment on the video itself, or you can send me an email at kodeshnation.com. That is kodeshnation@gmail.com, rather. Kodesh Nation, QODESH Nation at gmail.com if you have anything extensive or private you would like to say to me. Otherwise, comment in the video, because I want to make sure that I'm bringing this across in a way that's understandable to you, that I'm making myself clear with this, because this is a work in progress of a long time. Lots of prayer and fasting have gone into this lesson. And so I pray that you don't take this lightly. I believe that the Most High is speaking through this lesson to his people in this end time hour. So without any further delay, we're going to get into this. So again, the title is Unclean Sex Acts, the Secrets of the Watchers. And I am Brother Hiram, the author of it. Hallelujah. Now, the scriptures and the writings do not contain modern day terminology such as giving head, eating out, or even oral sex or anal sex. There is, however, a biblical word that pertains to such practices, as we will see in this lesson. Now, in this lesson, we will examine the numerous usages of this particular word and its connection with sexual activity. So the word we're talking about is uncleanness. Now, before we get into it, I want you to ask yourself a question. Now, when it comes to uncleanness, and especially uncleanness as we see it written in the Brit Kadashah, the New Covenant writings, have you ever heard a lesson on this particular subject? What have you heard about this particular subject? What do you know uncleanness to be? And I say this because it's somewhat of a mystery. I personally have never heard a sermon or a teaching on uncleanness just by itself, you know, as we see it in the New Covenant writings. I heard a preacher talk about it at one time briefly, but in his opinion, it was like uncleanness, like people that don't want to take a bath or something. So he was way off as far as his definition of it. Outside of that, I have never heard a sermon on this. I've never heard anybody teach on this. And I would venture to say that you could say the same, that this is, you don't hear people talk about this. But we're going to talk about this in this lesson. So uncleanness, what's the definition of it? We're going to look at the Greek and we're going to look at the Hebrew. Now, the Greek 167, akatharsia. All right. And later on, that's going to come into play. It's going to be very significant because it's the Greek that's used in the New Testament, New Covenant writings. And then it's the Greek that's used in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures in times of old. And so we're going to see this word show up in both. And the Hebrew is 2932 in the Strongs. It's tumah. And so the definition of akatharsia and tumah, pretty much the same. It's impurity, physically or morally, filthiness, unclean. That is the definition of uncleanness. Now, usages of akatharsia and tumah in the Torah or Septuagint. And thou shalt go into And thou shalt not go into a woman under separation for her uncleanness, to uncover her nakedness. And that's Leviticus 18:19. And I'm quoting that from the Brenton's Septuagint. And so akatharsia, uncleanness. All right, let me go ahead and get out of the way here. And this is the law of his uncleanness. Whoever has a gonorrhea out of his body, this is his uncleanness in him by reason of the issue, by which his body is affected through the issue. All the days of the issue of his body, by which his body is affected through the issue, there is his uncleanness. Now that's Leviticus 15:3 in the Brenton's Septuagint. All right, and so we see out of the Torah what uncleanness is. It's pretty clear what uncleanness is out of the Torah. Now we're talking about what is known as ritual uncleanness. There are many things that would make you ritually or ceremonially unclean, where you couldn't go into the tabernacle or the temple. And so we see two things that are relevant to our teaching here. And that is the blood that comes from the woman's menstrual, or this semen issue that comes from the man that has something amiss with it. And so we see that both of these are uncleannesses. Now, there are other ways to become unclean. You can touch a dead body, you could touch a leper. There are different things where you could become unclean and you could not go into the tabernacle or temple. You had to be separated until evening, or maybe separated 7 days. And so it's pretty clear what uncleanness is when we read about it in the Torah. But once we get to the New Covenant writings, then it's not so clear anymore. And the reason why is because it's put within a particular context, and we're going to see what that context is. Now, it says, unless when I come again, my Elohim will humble me among you, and that I shall bewail many which have sinned already and have not repented of the uncleanness and fornication and lasciviousness which they have committed. That's 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians 12:21. Now, keep in mind, this uncleanness that Shaul is talking about here, it's grouped together with fornication and lasciviousness, which are both sexual sins. And so we see that all three of these are sexual sins. Fornication is more of an umbrella that covers all sexual sin, but uncleanness is more specific. Lasciviousness is more specific. But this is talking about sexual sin here. Now, as we go on, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. Now, this is Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. Now, look at the first things that are mentioned. Once again, we see uncleanness grouped together with other sexual sins. We see it grouped together with adultery, fornication, and lasciviousness. And so we see, even throughout this passage here in Galatians, we see it brought in groups. Like, look at the rest of it: idolatry, witchcraft, that's a group; hatred, variance, emulations, wrath. See, that's a group right there. Strife, seditions, heresies, that's a group. Envyings, murders, that's a group. Drunkenness, revelings, and such like. And so we see that it was put in groups, but the first group is talking about sexual sins, and uncleanness is mixed right in there. Now, who being past feeling have given themselves over unto lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. And so we see it once again with lasciviousness, sexual sin. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you, as becometh saints. So interesting that, as I talked about, fornication is more of an umbrella. It covers pretty much all sexual sin, but now it gets more specific because it says, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you as become a saint. So whatever this uncleanness is, it should not be named once among us as becometh the Kodashim, the set apart ones. Praise Yahuwah. And I've heard like a Christian preacher, because I said I've never heard a sermon on this subject before, but I heard just in passing, a Christian preacher try to say that uncleanness was greed, but that's not what it is. It's not what it is by definition, and it's not what it is by context. And I think he may have got it through this verse where it says, "and all uncleanness or covetousness." Maybe he tried to liken it unto covetousness, but if you look at the usages all throughout the New Covenant writings, that we see it grouped together with fornication more than anything else. And that's what I'm showing you here. All right. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness. See, there it is again. Inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And so if my memory serves me right, we see uncleanness grouped together with fornication, I believe about 5 different times here. So 5 different times in the New Covenant writings. Now we're going to look at what Kepha has to say, Peter. So if you have a problem with Paul, then we're going to look at what Kepha has to say. He's the chief apostle, the one to whom the keys of the kingdom were given. So it's not just Shaul, but it's Kepha as well. Now, he says this, but chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness. So that's very significant that it's called the lust of uncleanness, and despise government. Now, Peter's talking about the false teachers that are going to come in the last days. And so we know that this is sexual sin of some sort, because these same false teachers in 2 Peter 2:14 says, having eyes full of adultery and cannot cease from sin. And so we see that these were sexually lustful people here. They're in the lust of uncleanness. Praise Yahuwah. And so praise Yah, if and this is off script, but if you look at Jude, and there's a lot of parallels to Jude or Yehuda and 2 Peter 2 when it talks about false teachers, and even Jude has something to say about this as well, as far as the uncleanness that is amongst these false teachers, how they're sexually lustful. Now, back to Shaul, it says, wherefore Elohim also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. This is making reference to the Sodomites here. And so Elohim gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts. So we see the lust of uncleanness again. We see that uncleanness has something to do with sexual lust, and it's more specific than just fornication in general. And so we're talking about some specific sex acts here. Praise Yahuwah, especially as we get into Romans 1. So the difference between uncleanness, as we read about it in the Hebrew scriptures, and uncleanness, as we read about it in the Brit Hadashah, New Covenant writings, is that in the New, it is put within the context of sexual lust. And so that's why when I quoted from the Torah that I brought out uncleanness, I brought out verses dealing with uncleanness that were dealing with the procreative sex organs, the woman's vagina and the man's penis. And so I zeroed in on that in the Torah, even though there's other manners of uncleanness in the Torah. That's what's relevant for this particular discussion, as you just saw there, as you saw the connection. Like I said, about 5 different times that uncleanness is grouped together with fornication, and so we see it. We see it within the context of sexual lust. So that helps us narrow it down to see what is this uncleanness that they're talking about. So we're going to take a closer look at Romans 1 here. It says, wherefore Elohim also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of Elohim into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So let it be. For this cause Elohim gave them up to vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. That's Romans chapter 1, verses 24 through 27. Now, what we have to understand is that we're also told in the New Covenant writings that it is a shame to speak of those things which they do in secret. And so we see that the writers really made an attempt to be discreet. They really could have been more descriptive. And we have to understand that those of us in modern America, 2024, that we have been, our minds have been opened up to the depths of Satan. I mean, we've been just opened up to such explicit filth that sometimes it's hard for us to relate to discretion in people that are writing and speaking with discretion. And I have heard Christian preachers, Israelite mores, different people say over and over again that the Bible doesn't address oral sex. The Bible doesn't talk about oral sex. Well, they say that because it doesn't talk about it in the explicit modern day terminology that we're used to. No, you're not going to see the term oral sex in the Bible. No, you're not going to see giving head or eating out. You're not going to see that in the Bible, but you are going to see uncleanness. And as we narrow it down, you're going to see what this is talking about. And so even in Romans 1 here, that there is discretion being used when, the writer could have been much more descriptive. And so we got to keep that in mind. Now, Elohim, it said, Elohim gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their bodies between themselves. So whatever acts these people, all right, these sodomites, all right, whatever acts these people are committing, that they're dishonoring their own bodies. So in the mind of Yah, they are dishonoring their body through what they do. So as we follow along, it said that Elohim gave them up unto vile affections. Okay, so the vile affections, that would cover like the affections, the same-sex attraction, the affection that the sexual affection that men would have with men and women would have with women. All right. But it gets more specific than that. It gets more specific than talking about vile affections. It actually gets into what these people were doing. So it says, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. So what is the natural use? The natural use, and we're going to see that it's called the natural use of the woman in the next sentence. The natural use of the woman is that the woman's vagina was created for the man's penis to enter into, and thus you have procreative sex. That is the natural use of the woman. Okay. So where it says the women did change that natural use into that which is against nature, all we have to do, brothers and sisters, is put 2 and 2 together. What did these women change from? They changed from the natural use, the penis, and the vagina coming together. The natural use of the woman, the natural use of the woman's vagina is to receive the man's penis and to procreate. That is the natural use of the woman. So, what did they change that into? You see, they changed from something and they changed into something else. What did these women change that natural use into? In other words, what were they doing with their vaginas instead of the natural use of receiving the man's penis? Well, when you look at lesbians, now there are a lot of things that lesbians do, but it really boils down to about three things because they cannot have procreative sex because it's a woman and a woman. What are they known to do? Okay, they're known to grind on one another. All right, they're known to put objects in one another. You know, get a strap on. And, you know, we don't need to go way into detail about that, but these are unnatural uses of the woman. These are unnatural uses of the woman's vagina to be grinding on another woman's vagina or to be putting objects in it, whether another woman is doing it or whether you're just doing it yourself, you know, and you're putting objects in there. That is an unnatural use of the woman. But you know what else is an unnatural use of the woman? And that is, and this is probably one of the main things that lesbians do, and that is licking on one another in that area, oral sex. That is an unnatural use of the woman. Remember now, they change from something into something else. They change from the natural use of the woman and they started using their vagina unnaturally. So that which is against nature. So let's go on. And likewise, also the men leaving the natural use of the woman, there's again, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly. Remember, I talked about the discretion, where the writer's not going to just go into gross detail like we're used to hearing. See, a lot of us grew up listening to rap artists like Two Live Crew and that album they had out, As Nasty as They Want to Be. And so we've heard such explicit sexual filth that when we see something like this, that which is unseemly, we can't relate to that because it's so toned down from what we're used to. But men with men working that which is unseemly. Well, what were they working? Okay, what were these men doing? They were doing anal sex. Okay, so they wrote of it as being that which is unseemly because they're being discreet, because it's a shame to speak of those things which people do in secret. Hallelujah. All right. And receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. So Yah cursed them with diseases. And we see that even to this day. So, question, and I believe that I answered that question, and that is, what is that which is against nature and what is unseemly? You see. So let's kind of decode some of this discrete talk that the writer is doing here. All right. So that which is against nature, this is talking about acts. This is talking about specific acts. It's not just talking about a man being with a man and a woman being with a woman. These are actual acts that these people were doing. And you're going to see that as we tie all of this together, you're going to see that this is talking about specific sexual acts that these sodomites were doing that were unclean. All right, now, the most important question in this video. So this is extremely important. If there's any one section that you go through at least 2 or 3 times, go through this one because this is the key to just understanding this whole thing here. It says the most important question in this video: what is the connection between uncleanness as we read of in the Torah and uncleanness as we read of in the New Covenant writings? And so what's the connection? What's the missing link here? Because, you know, it's very clear what the uncleanness is as we read about it in the Torah. You know, we saw about the woman's menstrual, about the man's semen emission. And, we see other things about uncleanness, but that's what's relevant to this teaching here. So we know what uncleanness is there, but then we see it written about in the context of sexual lust in the New Covenant writings. What's the connection? I'm going to show it to you. All right. Take thou also unto thee wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and fitches, and put them in one vessel, and make thee bread thereof according to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon thy side. 390 days shalt thou eat thereof, and thy meat which thou shalt eat shall be by weight, 20 shekels a day. From time to time thou shalt eat it. Thou shalt drink also water by measure, the sixth part of an hin. From time to time shalt thou drink, and thou shalt eat it as barley cakes, and thou shalt bake it with dung that cometh out of man in their sight. And Yahuwah said, even thus shall the children of Yashrael eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles, whither I will drive them. Then said I, Master Yahuwah, behold, my soul hath not been polluted. For from my youth up even till now have I not eaten of that which dieth of itself, or is torn in pieces, neither came there abominable flesh into my mouth. Then he said unto me, lo, I have given thee cow's dung for man's dung, and thou shalt prepare thy bread therewith. This is Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 9 through 15. So let's break down this statement that Ezekiel gave. He said, then I said, not so, Master Yahuwah of Yashrael. Now, this is out of the Septuagint. This is the same verse here. Surely my soul has not been defiled with uncleanness. There it is, akatharsian, the same uncleanness that we're reading about in this last section. My soul has not been defiled with uncleanness, nor have I eaten that which died of itself, or was torn with beasts from my birth until now. Neither has any corrupt flesh entered into my mouth. So this was Ezekiel's response to Yahuwah telling him to take this bread and to cook it with man's dung. So in other words, just, light it on fire like you would firewood, and that's what you cook it with. Praise Yahuwah. So this is very significant because, we already saw what akathartan, okay, it's just a variation of the akatharsia, but we already see what that means. That's the uncleanness, but we see that there's another word here, and that is defiled. In the Strong's Greek 3392, it's memiante, okay, memiante, and there are different variations of this word. And so it says, my soul has not been defiled, memiante, with uncleanness, akathartan. And so Ezekiel mentions a few things here, okay, but what specifically applies to what Yahuwah told him to do? And we're going to see that here. And so that's the question. Under what category did eating bread cooked with human dung fall? All right. The soul being defiled with uncleanness, eating that which dies of itself or is torn with beasts, or eating abominable flesh. All right. So what category does that fall into, the eating of bread cooked with human dung? And the answer is the soul being defiled with uncleanness. That specifically is what he was pointing to when dealing with bread cooked with human dung, that would defile his soul with uncleanness. Now we're going to look at a couple other things here before we tie all this together. Now, it says that I was in the city of Joppa praying, and in a trance I saw a vision, a certain vessel descend as it had been a great sheet let down from heaven by four corners, and it came to me, upon the which I had fastened my eyes, and I considered, and I saw four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And I heard a voice saying unto me, Arise, Peter, slay and eat. But I said, Not so, master. For nothing common or unclean hath at any time entered into my mouth. But the voice answered me again from heaven. It said, What Elohim hath cleansed, that call not thou common. That's from Acts 11, 5 through 9. This is Kepha. This is Peter reciting his own testimony. Now, when it was originally spoken in Acts 10, that was Luke's version of it. But this is Kepha. This is his own version of it. And he said that nothing common, koinon, that's what's used. That's very similar to the memiante, something that defiles. Nothing common, nothing defiling or unclean, akatharton, hath at any time entered into my mouth. So Kepha is saying more or less what Ezekiel was saying. All right. And so this word koinon, we know that it means defiling or defileth, because in Revelation 21:27, it says, And there shall in no wise enter into it, this is the new Yerushalayim, anything that defileth, koinon, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And so we see nothing defiling or unclean, has entered into my mouth. Now, my point in bringing this out about Peter saying nothing defiling or unclean has entered into my mouth, and Ezekiel saying that my soul has not been polluted with uncleanness. It hasn't been defiled with uncleanness, is that there's more going on here than just unclean food. That's my whole point here, is there's something going on here beyond unclean food, or food that's been animals that have died of itself or been torn with beasts. There's more going on here, because we're talking about nothing defiling or unclean has at any time entered into my mouth. This is what Kepha and Ezekiel are talking about. So tying it all together, like I said, this is the most important question in this whole video. That what is the connection between uncleanness, as we read about in the Torah, and then uncleanness as we read about in the Brit Chadashah New Covenant writings? So tying it all together, says, according to the Hebrew scriptures, we can be defiled by putting the following in our mouth. All right. Unclean flesh, that which dies of itself, that which was torn of beasts, and human waste. Okay. See, this is what Ezekiel was making reference to, because this is human dung. And he wasn't even talking about putting the human dung in his mouth. He's talking about merely cooking with it. And so he was, because keep in mind, Ezekiel wasn't just a prophet, he was a priest. He knew all the laws of uncleanness. He knew them backwards and forwards, knew them like the palm of his hand. And so he knew that even cooking with human dung, that would defile that bread, and his soul would be polluted with uncleanness. His soul would be defiled with uncleanness. So we see that human waste defiles, as well as unclean flesh, or that which dies of itself, or that which is torn of beasts. All right. Also, according to the Hebrew scriptures, we can be defiled indirectly by eating anything cooked with human dung. Like I said, it doesn't have to be putting the dung itself in your mouth, but even cooking with it would defile the bread, and us consuming that bread would defile us. So we see that there is an indirect defilement here when it comes to things we put in our mouth. All right, next point. The Brit Chadashah New Covenant writings put uncleanness in the context of sexual lust. I believe I made that clear. So in some of the previous slides here, it's clear that the context is sexual lust. And now, therefore, we can be defiled indirectly in the lust of uncleanness by making oral contact with organs of the body which excrete human waste. We don't necessarily have to make contact with the waste itself. And so that's the connection, brothers and sisters. That is the connection. Ezekiel provides us with the missing link. And that is the missing link is that it's clear that the menstrual blood and semen from a man or the human waste that proceeds from the reproductive organs and also from the anus, that it's clear that those things are uncleanness. You know, those things are uncleanness, and those things can defile, and they can certainly defile that if they're put into our mouth. But the most significant part of what I wanted to show you here through Ezekiel is that those unclean substances, you know, the blood, the semen, the human waste, that does not have to go directly into our mouth in order for us to be defiled. That we could be defiled indirectly by putting our mouth, making oral contact with the very organs of the body which excrete that human waste. That is why oral sex is uncleanness. Now, what you're going to notice throughout this teaching is that I'm really zeroing in on oral sex more than anal sex because, in my experience, people aren't going to really fight you over anal sex. I mean, that's a lot of people are against that, and the medical implications of anal sex are a lot more obvious. I mean, the anus, it's not elastic like the woman's vagina. So because of that, you know, these sodomites, they lose their elasticity and they have to wear these colostomy bags sometimes. And, you know, some of these men, I've heard they could pass a grapefruit through themselves. And so, I mean, there are obvious things like that that show us that that's against nature. You know, that's not Yah's design, and even how that they can get tears within themselves. And so I say them like the sodomites, but anybody doing anal sex, you know, it could be a married couple, man and a woman, but still it's like you can get tears in the lining of the anus because it's not made to take, you know, a hard object from the outside in like that. And those tears, you know, that semen can get into the bloodstream through those tears. There's so many aspects of anal sex that show that it's against nature. It's definitely not Yah's design. And that's not what most Israelites have a problem with, I would say. Now, most Israelites have a problem with this oral sex thing because, you know, the medical implications of it are not as pronounced. I mean, there's really, you know, if you're not having multiple partners, I mean, there's really not a lot of harm that can come from that from a medical standpoint. And that's what I believe confuses people. But you're going to see me zeroing in on oral sex because this is what people will fight you over. This is what it gets you in the octagon. This is what it get people wanting to take the gloves off. All right, because there's a lot of people doing it in Israel. A lot of Israelites are doing this. A lot of Christians are doing this. A lot of Bible believers. A lot of people are doing this. And Christian preachers, Jewish rabbis, a lot of leaders throughout the years have compromised and telling people they're all right. And so this is much more pervasive, much more of an issue, this oral sex thing. And so that's why I'm zeroing in on this. Even though I'm talking about oral and anal, I'm zeroing in on the oral because that is what is most relevant to us, you know, to the 12 tribes of Israel. but also to anyone who says they are a Bible believer. So I'm going to read this in the red one more time before I go on. Therefore, we can be defiled indirectly in the lust of uncleanness by making oral contact with organs of the body which excrete human waste. We do not necessarily have to make contact with the waste itself. All right, moving on. We're going to look at cultural context, because one thing I prayed as I was putting this lesson together, I prayed that I could find some first century literature that would show what their understanding of uncleanness was. What was their understanding? Our understanding is not relevant. It's what their understanding is, which is relevant, because the New Covenant writings were written to first century people. And so we want to get into their minds, that what did they mean when they say uncleanness, and how did they receive that word? And I found something here. Now, this is the Epistle of Barnabas, chapter 10, verse 8. Now, this is a writing that obviously didn't make it into the Bible, but it did make it into one of the earlier Bibles, the Codex Sinaiticus. So the Codex Sinaiticus, this is one of the world's earliest and oldest complete Bible collections, as far as Genesis to Revelation. And that, along with the Shepherd of Hermas, that made it into the Codex Sinaiticus, but it was eventually phased out and didn't make it into our regular Bibles today. But this is what it says here. This is what it says. It says, moreover, he hath hated the weasel also, and with good reason. Thou shalt not, saith he, become such as those men of whom we hear, as working iniquity with their mouth for uncleanness. Neither shalt thou cleave unto impure women who work iniquity with their mouth, for this animal conceiveth with its mouth. And so what's going on here is that in this Epistle of Barnabas, the writer is giving a spiritual application to the dietary law. And he comes to the place where it talks about the weasel being unclean. Now, it was believed by some back in that day that the weasel actually conceived with its mouth, because the weasel carries their young around in its mouth. And so, I mean, that's a myth. I mean, that's not, it's not true, but it was a myth that a lot of people believed back then, that the weasel actually conceived with its mouth. And so the fact that it's talking about conception in the mouth and then working iniquity with their mouth for uncleanness, and the women working iniquity with their mouth, that this is clearly, when you put all this together, clearly this is talking about oral sex. Like I said, these people were discreet. They weren't nasty as they want to be, like we were when we were in the world like that. They're trying to be discreet, but this is talking about oral sex. This is a first century document showing how people thought, what uncleanness meant to these people in the first century. If you were to transport one of us back to the first century, and we were to walk around and tell a first century person, ask a question about a woman, hey, does that woman give head? Does she give head? They'd have no idea what we're talking about. They're like, what do you mean, does she give head? Does she take the head off of her neck and give it to somebody? What do you mean, give head? You see? And likewise, if you transported one of them to 2024 and they said, hey, does that woman there, does she engage in uncleanness? We'd have no idea what he's talking about. What do you mean uncleanness? You see? So that's why we need to get out of our 21st century nasty as we want to be mindset and get into the mind of a first century person. When you hear uncleanness, okay, what comes to mind? As a first century person, what comes to mind? And the Epistle of Barnabas tells us clearly. And so we see this is a pretty clear reference to oral sex here. So I brought this out for cultural context. So, once again, the Epistle of Barnabas was a widely circulated first century document that links uncleanness to oral sex. This is how they used this word back in those times. Now we're going to get to our subtitle, and that is The Secrets of the Watchers. We're going to look at the influence of the Watchers, the fallen ones. You know, some call them the fallen angels, but the fallen ones, the Watchers. We're going to see their part in this. And Yahuwah also said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness, and make a hole in the desert in Dudael, and throw him in, place upon him rough and jagged rocks, cover him with darkness, and let him remain there forever, and cover his face so he may not see light. On the day of great judgment, he shall be thrown into the fire, and restore the earth which the messengers have corrupted, and announce the restoration of the earth, so that the plague may be healed, and all the children of men may not perish due to the secrets that the watchers have revealed and taught their children. Okay, so what are these secrets that the watchers have revealed and taught their children? All right, here we go. The entire earth has been corrupted by the deeds taught by Azazel. What are these deeds? Attribute all sin to him. And to Gabriel, Yahuwah said, proceed against the bastards, the outcasts, and the children of fornication, and destroy them. Make them fight one another, so that they may destroy each other in battle. For they shall not have long lives, and no request made by their fathers on their behalf will be granted. For they hope to live an eternal life, and each one of them thinks he will live 500 years. And Yahuwah said to Michael, go bind Simyaza and his companions, who have joined with women and defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. So there it is. And we already know, because out of Genesis 6, I believe it is, where it says the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and that produced the Nephilim. And so keep in mind, these Nephilim, when they died, that their departed spirits remained on the earth, and they are today who we know as the demons. And so where it talks about the secrets that the watchers have told their children, like that, these are children of the watchers, you know, the demons running around on the earth today. But so we already know about this, you know, the fallen ones, the watchers, joining with women, human wives, taking human wives and producing the Nephilim. But it says they defiled themselves with them. Not only did they take them unlawfully and have children, but it said they defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. So there were unclean sex acts that the watchers introduced to humanity. All right. And these acts are with us to this day. Praise Yahuwah. Let me go back here for a moment. I'm not quite done with this. And so this uncleanness, that this is the source of it right here. This is the source. The fallen ones, the watchers, they introduced this to mankind. This is 1 Enoch chapter 10, verses 8 through 11. All right. Now, no lesson on this topic would be complete without dealing with Hebrews 13:4. Okay, because you have people that they are convinced that marriage just sanctifies, sets apart, makes clean any sexual act under the sun, as long as you're married. Well, we're going to see here that that's not true. We're going to dismantle that here. Now it says marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers Elohim will judge. That's what it says in the King James. That's how most people are used to reading this. But let's look at it in the ESV. Now, I'm not lifting up the ESV and telling you you need to go get one. I'm just saying that in this particular version, it reads different. And then we're going to compare both of these versions to what the Greek says. Now it says, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For Elohim will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. So Hebrews 13:4 out of the English Standard Version, ESV. Now, this is closer to the truth, because we already know that the marriage bed can be defiled. Look at Leviticus 18. You can't lie with your wife in her menstrual. You can't bring an animal into your marriage bed. You can't bring a third person into your marriage bed. We already know that the marriage bed can be defiled. And so here it says, let the marriage bed be undefiled. So this is actually a command or an instruction rather than a declaration that the marriage bed is undefiled. Do you see the difference it makes? All right, now let's look at the Greek here. As we look at the Greek, it says, honorable let marriage be in all, and the marriage bed undefiled. The sexually immoral, and adulterers will judge Elohim. And so we see the let in there, the let in the be. Let marriage be honorable, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. So we see that the ESV here has the proper translation of this verse. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. Praise Yahuwah. So this is a command. This is instructions. And so this is why I'm teaching this, so that we can let the marriage bed be undefiled. Praise Yahuwah. All right. So conclusion. Uncleanness in the Torah is the unclean matter that is expelled from human orifices. Uncleanness in the New Covenant writings is the same, but it is written in the context, it is written of in the context of sexual sin. Uncleanness was the specific sin unto which the homosexuals and lesbians were given over. We can be defiled indirectly by sexual uncleanness by making oral contact with human waste orifices. The Epistle of Barnabas is a first century document that clearly links uncleanness with oral sex. It puts uncleanness into cultural context. In other words, it allows us to see what people of that day, how people of that day understood the word uncleanness. The sin of uncleanness is one of the secrets of the watchers revealed to the children of men. In other words, that's how it got to us, about 6,000 years ago. The secrets of the watchers, and it talks about, Yahusha talks about the depths of Satan. Praise Yah, because these are things that men would not have figured out. Men wouldn't figure out stuff like this by nature. You get a man and a woman, and they have no contact with the modern world. They're out on some desert island. They just grow up just totally with nature. They would not figure out oral sex or anal sex, because there are things in nature that warn against that and whatnot. Like with the oral, you have the smells, you have the taste, and just, you put something in your mouth that doesn't belong there, nature will tell you that it doesn't belong. You could, pick stuff off the ground, and you could tell, whether it's like an edible herb or whether it's, something harmful, because nature will tell you that. Nature will tell you what does and doesn't belong in your mouth. And so there are things that had to be introduced to us from the outside that we would not have figured out by nature. And that is part of the secrets of the watchers. The watchers lusted in uncleanness as they defiled themselves with their human wives. Like I said, this is where we got this from. According to the Greek text, the marriage bed can be defiled by either adultery or fornication. As I said, fornication is an umbrella, covers all sexual sin. And the marriage bed can be defiled by fornications, and uncleanness is under the umbrella of fornication. Oral and anal sex are unclean sex acts. All who do such shall not inherit the kingdom of Yah. See, this is why this is such a big deal. Because your soul is at stake here. This is no light matter. So please pray about this. Go back through this video. Get into the scriptures that I'm bringing out. Prayerfully go through them, because this is serious business. We have brothers and sisters that are going to miss the kingdom over this, end up on the broad road which leads to destruction. Many there be which go in thereat, and not end up finding that narrow road which leads to life, which few there be that find it. Because Yahusha said, strive to enter in at the straight gate. For many, I say unto you, shall seek to enter in, and they shall not be able. This is going to be one of the reasons why that people are seeking to enter in, but they won't be able to enter in, because they're going to have some sin in their life that they didn't account for, didn't repent of here on this earth. And this is one of them, brothers and sisters. All right, answering objections. Now, objection. The Bible does not specifically condone or condemn oral or anal sex. Therefore, it is left up to the married couple to decide what is acceptable to them. So this is how a lot of people feel. This is a very standard position. What goes on in the marriage bed, that's a husband's and wives. That's their own business. You need to stay out of people's business. That's a private matter. Well, what goes on between a husband and wife in bed has never been merely their own business. Never. Why? Because Leviticus 18, that Yah regulated even the marriage bed. In Leviticus 18, you cannot lie with your wife on a menstrual. There are just certain things you cannot do in the marriage bed. That in and of itself tells you that no, that's not their own business, but it is something that Yah regulates. Now, answer to this objection. Although the scriptures and writings are silent on the modern day terminologies of oral and anal sex, the concepts are there in the usage of the word uncleanness. Also in this teaching, we dismantled the false notion that marriage makes all sex acts clean. And so people say that, it doesn't condone or condemn because they don't know what to look for. But you know what? You know what to look for now. All right. Another objection. The Most High does not specifically mention oral or anal sex in Leviticus 18. So whatever is not specifically mentioned in that chapter is acceptable for married couples. And the answer? In that same chapter, within the context of sexual sin, the Most High commands us to not do as the Egyptians and Canaanites did. Egypt was well known for their affinity for oral sex and masturbation, and Baal Peor was a Canaanite deity that demanded oral and anal sex via temple prostitutes. Leviticus 18 was not meant to be an exhaustive list, but rather to prepare the children of Israel to deal with the Canaanite nations in the land. So all you have to do is read the end of that chapter to see what the purpose was in the Most High giving that. It's not an exhaustive list. I mean, common sense will tell you, you could look, those of us that looked at porn when we were in the world and all the filthy things that take place there, you mean to tell me that if it's not listed in Leviticus 18, that we could do everything else that we saw in the porno movies when we were in the world, as long as we're married? Okay, so a husband and a wife, they can urinate on one another, they can defecate on one another, they can beat one another with whips and chains, as long as it's not mentioned in Leviticus 18. Well, you and I both know that that is not sound, brothers and sisters. So no, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it was meant to prepare them to deal with the Canaanites. They didn't need an exhaustive list when it came to the Egyptians because they were there for centuries. So they already knew what the Egyptians did. They were as familiar with the Egyptian practices as we, the 12 tribes of Israel in captivity, are familiar with American practices. Why? Because we have become Americans and we're tightly woven into the fabric of American culture. That's how our people were in Egypt. So they knew exactly what the Most High was talking about when in Leviticus 18, the context is sexual sin, and he says, don't do as the Egyptians do. They knew what he was talking about. All right. Next objection. If oral sex is wrong, why is it so pleasurable? Why did the Most High create the reproductive organs so responsive to be so responsive to oral stimulation? Answer: the Most High created procreative sex to be very pleasurable. The watchers under the direction of Hashatan were always looking to one up the Most High, and this is one of the areas in which they attempted to do so. Furthermore, the Sodomites say that anal sex can be very pleasurable. Does that necessarily mean that the Most High created the anus for sexual pleasure? Or is it just a pleasurable perversion? All right. Next objection. My husband can't get it up or keep it up, and oral sex is the only way I can get there. Now, this is an important one because this is an issue in Israel. This is a real issue, and by the favor of Yah, I'm going to attempt to tackle this. Answer number one. There's going to be a two-part answer to this. The Most High is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Combine prayer and fasting with the application of practical knowledge. Much of the time, ED/PE, that's erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, can be remedied by a man optimizing his testosterone levels, blood circulation, prostate health, etc. There are many testimonies online of ED and PE overcomers who are not even believers in Yah and Yahusha. How much more so his children who apply all that practical knowledge and combine it with prayer and fasting. Now, there's a second part to this answer, and I want you to be prepared, especially if you're a woman. If you're a daughter of Zion, I want you to be prepared to hear this. There is somewhat of a slap in this, but my intent is not to hurt you or anybody else, but to tell you the truth so that you may be made free. Answer number two. The husband may not be 100% of the problem. This is especially the case if the man gets morning wood, yet can't seem to perform with his wife. In such a case, ED/PE is not the problem. There are other factors that need to be considered, such as the husband's state of mind. Does he feel disrespected, rejected, undesired, stressed out? See, if he's stressed out, then cortisol is the stress hormone. The higher the cortisol level in your body, that indicates that you're under a lot of stress. And cortisol can significantly lower testosterone levels, even in healthy virile men. So you can be a healthy virile man and be so stressed out that it can kill your sexual performance, even being healthy and virile. And so there's the husband's state of mind. There's also the wife's state of mind. Is she visibly showing disinterest and thus killing the mood? So, her level of interest, her attitude, that comes into play, because having the right mindset, having the right attitude, that adds to the chemistry of a man and a woman coming together. Now, also, how is the wife presenting herself? All right. Now, this is what I'm talking about this is somewhat of a sensitive issue, but I got to keep it 100 with you here. Now, because just like men have been, drawn into the fantasy world of porn, women have been drawn into the fantasy world of romance novels. And so they have this fantasy world where here you have a man show up and he can just please you like a porn star, and you don't need to do anything at all but just be there like that. When in reality, that there are things that a woman can do to meet her husband halfway, but it takes some work. How is the wife presenting herself? Is she overweight? Okay, is she overweight? And when I say overweight, that it's like, does your husband continually see you eat junk food when he knows that you know better? And you continue to have a weight problem. He knows that you know better. And because, like I said, it's different when you know somebody's trying. But when he sees that you're not really trying, you're eating junk food, you keep saying that you're going to work out and you never end up working out. And That's how you present yourself, like that. Now, when I talk about weight, now don't get offended because some brothers like that extra weight. Now, because I can't speak for everybody now. You see, some brothers like that extra weight. Some brothers do, some brothers don't. But mainly what I'm talking about is the area of self discipline. And when your husband sees that you lack in self discipline, the message that can convey to him is that he's not important to you. It's not important to you to keep your body up, to eat right, to exercise. That's not important, and therefore he's not important to you. Sometimes men interpret that like that. So as a result, it says, is he losing attraction for her? You see? And so, like I said, I mean, a man, especially if a man gets morning wood but can't perform with his wife, there's something else going on. And y'all need to communicate to find out what that something else is. Okay, next. It is important that wives as well as husbands show up both physically and mentally in order to optimize their sexual experiences. Both must be willing to put in the work. Like I said, it takes work. So it's not like this romance novel fantasy where a man can just show up and perform like a porn star. You don't have to do anything at all. No, there are things that the man and the woman can do to optimize the experience, where you do it Yah's way, you have normal procreative sex, that will be enough for you. That will bring the satisfaction that you need. Praise Yahuwah. It's just that when we sub-optimize ourselves, when we just feed ourselves with junk food and processed food, and we have a sedentary lifestyle where we're sitting most of the day, and we do these things, we're not in the best condition when we come together. Now, it's like the oral sex is it's like a cheat code. I mean, that's like a easy way out. It's like a crutch to make up for the fact that we're not healthy, and we're not healthy enough to come together in a normal way and bring satisfaction to one another. Because Yahuwah did not make a mistake, and he did not create something that was incomplete. It's us that's the problem. If we cannot achieve satisfaction, a man and a woman, through normal procreative sex, then procreative sex is not the problem. We are the problem, and we need to figure out how we're the problem and correct that, because it is a devil's lie that the watchers improved upon what Yahuwah already created and gave us something a little better. No, that's a lie. That's a lie from hell. What Yahuwah gave us is plenty enough for our satisfaction. We just need to seek him in prayer, and we just need to apply some of this practical knowledge. Let me give you a testimony before I move on, because I want to show you all how the devil is a liar. That there is a brother that he was having these problems with his wife, as far as he was having problems performing and I guess getting it up and keeping it up. And he said to his wife, tell you what, let's get on our knees and pray and seek Yah and ask him to help us. And they got on their knees and they prayed, and they got up off of their knees and they went back to bed, and they were probably 90 minutes going at it with satisfying sex. Now, that may be a surprise to some of y'all, because you think Yah doesn't have anything to do with our sex life. No, they prayed. Yah touched their bodies, and the rest was history. Praise Yah. So that's why I say pray. I'm not just saying that just to be religious and say, hey, pray about it. No, I mean, prayer is practical. So with prayer and with practical knowledge, there is no sexual problem that cannot be solved. Why? Because Yahuwah created sex. All right. The Song of Solomon speaks of oral sex in symbolic language when describing a passionate love scene between Shlomo and his Shulamite bride. Therefore, oral sex can be set apart within the context of marriage. So that's a big one. That's I call Song of Solomon and Hebrews 13:4 the twin towers. So the twin towers, those are the two main things that people hang on to biblically to justify oral sex. You know, if you don't believe me, then watch some YouTube videos. Watch some YouTube videos of people that are pro oral sex, and you're gonna hear those twin towers, Hebrews 13:4, and then Song of Solomon. But we're gonna deal with the Song of Solomon here. We already dealt with Hebrews. Now, the sensual symbolic language of Song of Solomon is not as clear as many would like to think it is. Now, I say Song of Solomon, it's actually Song of Songs, but this is how most people know it, as the Song of Solomon. So the symbolic language, the sensual symbolic language of the Song of Solomon is not as clear as many would like to think it is. The man's fruit being sweet to the woman's taste, in chapter 2, verse 3, and eating the woman's pleasant fruits, chapter 4:16, can be a reference to the climactic pleasure of normal procreative sex. There are many modern love songs that liken sweetness to love in general and love making specifically, like Sweet Love, Anita Baker, or How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You. You know, many love songs talk about sweetness, but they just relate it to love in general or just making love. It's not like a something that you have to put in your mouth. So it's symbolic. And so there are problems with trying to force a one-to-one relationship between the symbol and substance. So we're going to look at these problems here. Problems with forcing an oral sex interpretation into Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 3, and chapter 4, verse 16. There are symbolic references to tasting throughout the scriptures that are not one-to-one in relationship. In other words, when it talks about tasting something in a symbol, the substance has nothing to do with putting something in your mouth. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. Let me give you a few examples. Taste and see that Yahuwah is good, Psalm 34, verse 8. How sweet are thy words to my taste, Psalm 119, 103. And have tasted of the heavenly gift, Hebrews 6, verse 4. Now, one of the objections I got with the beta version was that this symbolism here is talking about spiritual things, talking about Yahudah. It's not talking about Yahuwah and spiritual things. It's not really talking about natural things. So I put this in here. Even in symbolic references comparing natural things with natural, we still do not see a one-to-one relationship. Where it talks about eating something or tasting something, we still do not see that the symbol points to the substance of actually putting something in your mouth. We don't see that. That's not how symbolism works in the scripture. Let me give you a few examples. Whoso keepeth the fig tree shall eat the fruit thereof. Remember, his fruit was sweet to my taste. So he that waiteth on his master shall be honored. Proverbs 27:18. That's comparing natural with natural. All right. Eating the fruit of the fig tree, and it's pointing towards something that has nothing to do with putting something in your mouth. It's talking about waiting on your master and being honored. So the pleasantness of that fruit relates to the pleasantness of being honored, the pleasant feeling you get from being honored of your master. Also, say ye to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Proverbs 3, verse 10, you eat the fruit of your doings. All right, Psalm 60, verse 3 talks about drinking the wine of astonishment. All right, Proverbs 4:17, drink the wine of violence. And so we see what symbol and substance, symbol and substance. We see there is no one-to-one relationship. When it talks about eating something, tasting something, drinking something, it is not symbolic of something someone's doing where they're putting something in their mouth. It's talking about something completely different. And so every truth is confirmed by the mouth of two or three witnesses. There's not one other witness in all of the scriptures or the writings of when you have the symbol being putting something in your mouth like that, but it's pointing to the substance of putting something in your mouth where there's a perfect one-to-one relationship. There's no second witness to that. And so if you want to interpret that the Song of Solomon is saying that, then that's a private interpretation. That's your own interpretation. You can't support that with anything. Now, again, continuing with problems with forcing an oral sex interpretation into Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 3 and 4:16. If you believe these verses are one-to-one, meaning that when it talks about his fruit was sweet to my taste, that's actually talking about having something in your mouth, or the woman, come and enjoy his pleasant fruits. That's talk about putting something in your mouth. If you believe these verses are one-to-one, then you got to ask yourself these questions. Is a man's sexual organ sweet to a woman's taste? Is the taste of a woman's sexual organ pleasant? If they are, then why the need for flavored oils? What are they trying to cover up? And when I say flavored oils, you can get these oils, you can get them in a sex shop, but you could also just get them in a mall where people use these flavored oils for oral sex. And the question I ask is, why do you need the oil? If it's perfectly natural and normal, why do you need the oil then? What are you trying to cover up? You're trying to cover up the fact that it's not sweet to the taste. Oral sex is not sweet to the taste. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to go one-to-one in your interpretation, where his fruit is sweet to my taste, or come eat his pleasant fruits, that has to mean you're putting something in your mouth. You got to go all the way with it. It's not just putting something in your mouth, it's putting something sweet in your mouth. And oral sex is not, the sexual organs of a man and a woman, they are not sweet to the taste. Anybody who used to do that in the world or is still doing it can attest to that. Also, to the Hebrew mind, the sexual organs release unclean matter, semen, blood, human waste, that if contacted would cause one to have to separate themselves for a period of time. Would it make sense to the Hebrew mind that these organs would be likened unto sweet and pleasant tasting fruit? See, let's get out of our mind. Let's get out of our modern American mind, and let's get into the ancient Hebrew mind like that. Would they liken that to sweet and pleasant fruit, knowing that these organs expel uncleanness? I think that's a fair question. All right, challenge questions. So up to this point, let's say if you say that you are not convinced by what I have presented to you, then what I ask of you is that you take me up on these challenge questions. I'm being serious now. All right. Because, I mean, you can say all day long, oh, okay, that's just your interpretation, or, oh, okay, I don't believe you. Okay, great. But the thing is, you're going to have to come up with some answers for yourself, before you check out of here and whatnot, because those who do uncleanness are not going to enter the kingdom of Yah. So you're going to have to deal with that. Now, challenge questions. If the uncleanness mentioned by Shaul and Kepha can exclude us from the kingdom is not making reference to oral and anal sex, then what is it making reference to? Seeing that it is written in a sexual context, what other sexual sins could it refer to? What else could it be referring to in the homosexuals and lesbians in Romans 1? So in other words, what do homosexuals and lesbians do? What are they known for? What else could the watchers have introduced as they defiled themselves with their human wives? In other words, what sexually deviant practices are exalted by demons, which are their children, in the public arena even to this day? Because whatever the watchers introduced way back then, it's heavily promoted by demons even up to this day. So and I'm not just talking about porn now, but look at music videos, look at rap songs, rap videos. And when they're being sexually explicit, what acts are they exalting more than anything else? They're exalting oral sex, and you know it. And so why? Because they're full of demons. It's these demons that are pushing this oral sex in these music videos, rap songs, pornography. It's the work of demons, which was originally the work of the watchers. That's what they introduced to mankind. Also, I cited a first century document that specifically linked uncleanness with committing iniquity, committing iniquity with his or her mouth. What else could that be referring to? Next one. Seeing that it is a shame to mention what the wicked do in secret, is it reasonable to say that the writers of the Brit Kadashah New Covenant writings were not explicit when describing specific sexual sins? Seeing that unclean matter issues from the penis, vagina, and anus, could it be that to the first century Hebrew mind, uncleanness written within the context of sexual sin was all that was needed to understand that a man or a woman should not put his mouth on those areas? Like I said, I mean, our minds have been jaded with explicit, sexual, explicit language and descriptions. Theirs wasn't. Okay. These people were more discreet. All right. Now, another challenge question. If oral and anal sex are not against nature, then why the need for modifications? Why the need for special lubricants for anal sex, seeing that the vagina naturally lubricates itself? Why does one need to override their nervous system to train themselves to take a male sex organ down their throat? And why does one need to override their nervous system to endure the pungency of the vagina? Isn't nature trying to tell us something by its rejection of those things? And what I mean is that a woman taking a man's penis down her throat, if that's her first time doing that, she's going to choke. She's going to choke. And that's nature telling her, listen, that doesn't belong back there. Or a man with a woman, a man, quote unquote, going down on a woman, and how just the pungency, how a man really has to press his way, and override his nervous system because he wants to please that woman. So if it's not pleasant smelling or pleasant tasting, he just mentally pushes his way through the experience so that he could please that woman. Why does he need to do that if that's so natural? Why does he need to do that? Isn't that nature telling that man, listen, that doesn't belong in your mouth. That does not belong in your mouth. But you know what? We override nature. We override nature and we become numb to the voice of nature. Our conscience becomes seared with a hot iron, but nature is trying to tell us through a woman choking on a man's organ, or a man being repulsed by the smell and taste of a woman's sexual organ. Nature is trying to tell us that that doesn't belong in our mouth. And so why do we need to override our nervous system to press our way through that if that is so natural? Final challenge question. So I want to thank all of y'all if you've made it this far. I thank you for enduring this teaching. Like I said, please go through it again, and especially go through the parts that resonate with you, that you think you need more clarity on, and feel free to ask any questions as well, because we need to get this thing right, brothers and sisters. We can't afford to get it wrong. So this is the final challenge question. If by watching this video, you are not fully convinced, but you can at least admit that uncleanness could be referring to oral and anal sex, is it worth the risk? Is it worth the risk to continue in it? What if you are wrong? Like I said, some of you have not seen some of the concepts introduced that I introduced in this teaching. And I believe this teaching raised an eyebrow with some of you all, gave you something to think about. And so if you think that uncleanness could be referring to oral and anal sex, then is it really worth the risk? What if you are wrong? Praise Yahuwah. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to hang on to it, knowing that it could be something to keep you out of the kingdom? Praise Yahuwah. So I'm going to leave you with that. As I said, prayerfully, brothers and sisters, prayerfully go through this and go through it again and go through it again if you need to. Praise Yahuwah. Pray fast if you need to. All right, because we really need to hear from Yah on this. And so with that, I will say, Shalom.